Hi, I'm Melissa George with The Mindful Heart, and today our story is about a brother and sister named Hansel and Gretel. This one was written by the Brothers Grimm. On the edge of a great forest dwelt a very poor woodcutter with his wife and his two children. The boy was called Hansel, and the girl, her name was Gretel. They had very little to eat, and once, when a great famine fell on the land, the dad could no longer get any food at all. And now he thought this over one night, and he tossed and turned in his anxiety, and he groaned, and he said to his wife, "Oh, what will become of us? How will we feed our poor children when we no longer have anything even for ourselves?" "I'll tell you what, husband," answered the woman. "Early tomorrow morning we will take the children out to the forest to where it is the thickest, and there we will light a fire for them, and we will give each of them one piece of bread, and then we will go to our work and leave them alone, and they will not find their way home again, and we shall be rid of them." "No, wife," said the man, "I will not do that. How could I bear to leave my children alone in the forest? The wild animals would soon come and tear them to pieces." "Oh, you fool," she said. "Then we must all four die of hunger. You may as well start building coffins and digging holes." And she kept insisting until he finally consented. "But I feel very sorry for the poor children, all the same," said the man. The two children had also not been able to sleep because they were so hungry, and they heard what the woman had said to their father. Gretel wept bitter tears and said to Hansel, "Now all is over with us." "Oh, be quiet, Gretel," said Hansel. "Do not distress yourself. I will soon find a way to help us." And when the old folks had fallen asleep, he got up and he put on his little coat and he opened the front door and he crept outside, and the moon was shining brightly, and the white pebbles which laid in front of the house glittered like real silver pennies. Hansel stooped and put as many of them as he could inside his little pocket of his coat, and he put as many as he could possibly fit, and then he went back and he said to Gretel, "Be comforted, dear sister, and sleep in peace. God will not forsake us." And then he laid down in his own bed. And when the day dawned, but before the sun had come up, the woman came and awoke the two children, saying, "Get up, you lazy bones! We are going to the forest to fetch wood." And she gave each of them a piece of bread and said, "Here, this is something for your dinner, but do not eat it up before then, for you will get nothing else." Gretel put her bread in her apron, and Hansel didn't have any room for his, so he put his bread in her apron too. And then they all set out together into the forest. When they had walked a short time, Hansel stood still and peeped back, and he did so again and again, while he was throwing the little white pebbles one by one out of his pocket onto the road. When they had reached the middle of the forest, the father said, "Now, children, pile up some wood, and I will light you a fire, so you won't be cold." Hansel and Gretel gathered up brushwood, and they built it as high as a little hill. And the brushwood was lighted, and when the flames were burning very high, the woman said, "Now, children, lay yourselves down by the fire and rest. We will go into the forest and cut some wood, and when we're done, we will come back and fetch you away." Hansel and Gretel sat by the fire, and when noon came, each one of them ate a little piece of bread, and as they heard the strokes of the wood axe, they believed that their father was near. It was, however, not the axe. It was a branch which the father had fastened to a withered tree, which the wind was blowing backward and forward. It sounded like an axe. And as they had been sitting for such a long time, their eyes shut with fatigue, and at last they fell fast asleep. When they woke up, it was already dark, and Gretel began to cry and said, "How will we get out of the forest now?" But Hansel comforted her and said, "Just wait a little. When the moon has risen, then we shall find the way." And when the full moon had come up, Hansel took his little sister by the hand, and they followed the pebbles, which shone like newly coined silver pieces, and they showed him the way home. And they walked the whole night long, and by the break of day, once more they came to their father's house. They knocked at the door, and when the woman opened it and saw that it was Hansel and Gretel, she said, "Why, you naughty children, why have you slept so long in the forest? We thought you were never coming back at all." The father, however, rejoiced, for it had cut him to the heart to leave them alone behind. Not long afterward, there was another famine in all the land, and the children heard their stepmother saying at night to their father, "Everything is eaten again, and we have only half a loaf of bread left. After that there is no more. The children must go. We will take them further into the woods so that they will not find their way out again. There is no other means of saving ourselves." The man's heart was heavy, and he thought, "It would be better for you to share the last mouthful you have with your children." The woman, however, would listen to nothing that he had to say, but scolded and reproached him. And as he had yielded the first time, he had to do so a second time also. The children were, however, still awake and had heard this conversation. When the old folks were asleep again, Hansel got up to go out and pick up the pebbles. But the woman had locked the door, and Hansel could not get out. Nevertheless, he comforted his little sister, and he said, "Don't cry, Gretel. Just go to sleep quietly. The good God will help us." Early in the morning came the woman and took the children out of their beds. Their bit of bread was given to them, but it was still smaller than the time before. On the way to the forest, Hansel crumbled his in his pocket, and he often stood still and threw a morsel on the ground, and little by little he threw all the crumbs onto the path. The woman led the children still deeper into the forest, where they had never in their lives been before, and then a great fire was again made, and the stepmother said, "Just sit there, you children, and when you are tired, you may take a nap. We are going into the forest to cut wood, and in the evening, when we're done, we will come and fetch you away." When it was noon, Gretel shared her piece of bread with Hansel, who had scattered his along the path. Then they fell asleep, and evening passed, but no one came to get the poor children. They did not awake until it was dark, and Hansel comforted his sister and said, "Just wait, Gretel, until the moon rises, and then we shall see the crumbs of bread which I have strewn along our path. They will show us the way home again." But when the moon came out and they set out, they found no crumbs, for the many thousands of birds which fly about in the woods and fields had picked them all up. Hansel said to Gretel, "We shall soon find the way." But they did not find it. They walked the whole night and all the next day, from morning until evening, but they did not find their way out of the forest, and they were very hungry, for they had nothing to eat but 2 or 3 berries which they found on the ground. And as they were so weary that their legs would carry them no longer, they laid down beneath the tree and they fell asleep. It was now 3 mornings since they had left their father's house. They began to walk again, but they just got deeper and deeper into the forest. If help did not come soon, they would die of hunger and weariness. When it was midday, they saw a beautiful snow-white bird sitting on a branch, and it sang so delightfully that they stood still and listened to it. And when it had finished its song, it spread its wings and flew away before them. They followed it until they reached a little house, on the roof of which the bird landed. When they came quite up to the little house, they saw that it was built out of bread and covered with cakes, and the windows were made of sugar. "We will set to work on that," said Hansel, "and we will have a good meal. I will eat a bit of the roof, and you, Gretel, you can eat some of the window. It will taste so good." Hansel reached up and broke off a little off the roof, and he tried it to see how it tasted. Gretel leaned again against the window and nibbled at the panes, and then a soft voice cried from the room, "Nibble, nibble, gnaw, who nibbles at my door?" But the children went on eating without disturbing themselves. Hansel, who thought the roof tasted very nice, tore down a great piece of it, and Gretel pushed out the whole of one round window pane and sat down, enjoying it. Suddenly the door opened, and a very, very old woman, leaning on crutches, came creeping out. Hansel and Gretel were so terribly frightened they dropped what they had in their hands. The old woman, however, nodded her head and said, "Oh, dear children, who has brought you here? Do come in and stay with me. No harm shall happen to you." Then she took them both by the hand and led them into her little house. She set good food before them, milk and pancakes, sugar, apples, and nuts, and afterward she covered 2 pretty little beds with clean white linen, and Hansel and Gretel laid down in them, and they thought they were in heaven. But the old woman had only pretended to be so kind. She was really a wicked witch who laid in wait for children and who built that little bread house in order to entice them there. When a child fell into her power, she killed it and cooked it and ate it, and it was a feast day for her. Witches have red eyes, and they cannot see far, but they have a keen scent like animals, and they are aware when human beings draw near. When Hansel and Gretel came into her neighborhood, she laughed maliciously, and she said mockingly, "Ah ha ha, I have them, and they shall not escape me." Early in the morning, before the children were awake, she was up, and when she saw both of them sleeping and looking so pretty, with their plump little red cheeks, she muttered to herself, "That will be a dainty mouthful." Then she seized Hansel with her shriveled hand and carried him to a little stable, and she shut him in with a grated door. He might scream as he liked, that was of no use. Then she went to Gretel and shook her until she woke up and cried, "Get up, lazy thing, and fetch some water and cook something good for your brother. He is in the stable outside and is to be made fat, and when he is fat, I will eat him." Gretel began to weep bitterly, but it was all in vain. She was forced to do whatever the wicked witch ordered her. And now the best food was cooked for poor Hansel, and Gretel got nothing but crab shells. Every morning the woman crept to the stable and cried, "Hansel, stretch out your finger that I may feel if you will soon be fat." When 4 weeks had gone by, she was seized with impatience, and she could not wait any longer. "Ho there, Gretel," she cried to the girl. "Hop up and bring some water. Let Hansel be fat or lean, tomorrow I will kill him and cook him." Ah, how the poor little sister did cry when she had to fetch the water, and how her tears did flow down over her cheeks. "Dear God, do help us," she cried. "If the wild beasts in the forest had devoured us, we should at least, at any rate, have died together." "Keep your noise to yourself," said the old woman. "That won't help you at all." Early in the morning, Gretel had to go and hang up the cauldron full of water and light a fire under it. "First we will bake," said the old woman. "I have already heated the oven and kneaded the dough." She pushed poor Gretel out to the oven, from which the flames of fire were darting. "Creep in," she said, "and see if it is properly heated so that we can shut the bread in." And once Gretel was inside, the old woman had intended to shut the oven and bake her in it, and then eat her too. But Gretel saw what she had in her mind, and would not creep in. "Silly goose," said the old woman, "that door is big enough. Just look, I can get myself in." And she crept up, and she thrust her head in, and then she fell over into the oven and was miserably burnt to death. Gretel, however, ran as quick as lightning to Hansel, opened the stable, and cried, "Hansel, Hansel, we're saved! The old witch is dead." And then Hansel sprang out like a bird from a cage. And how they did rejoice and embrace each other, and dance about, and kiss each other on the cheek. And as they had no longer any need to fear her, they went into the witch's house, and in every corner there stood chests and buckets full of pearls and jewels. "These are far better than pebbles," said Hansel, and he stuffed into his pockets whatever he could fit. And Gretel said, "I too will take something home with me," and she filled her apron full. "But now we will go away," said Hansel, "that we may get out of the witch's forest." And when they had walked for 2 hours, they came to a great piece of water. "We cannot get over," said Hansel. "I see no bridge." "And no boat crosses either," answered Gretel. "But a white duck is swimming there. If I ask her, she will help us over." And then she cried, little duck, dost thou see Hansel and Gretel are waiting for thee? There's never a plank nor a bridge in sight. Take us across on thy back so white." The duck came to them, and Hansel seated himself on her back and told his sister to come sit by him. "No," said Gretel, "that would be too heavy for the little duck. She will take us across, one after the other." The good little duck did so, and when they were at once safely across and had walked for a short time, the forest seemed to be more and more familiar to them. At length they saw their father's house, and they began to run. They rushed into the parlor and threw themselves into their father's arms. The man had not known one happy hour since he had left the children in the forest. The woman, however, had died. Gretel emptied her apron until the pearls and precious stones ran about the room, and Hansel threw one handful after another out of his pocket. And then all their trouble was at an end, and they lived happily together. Now, what would you do if you lived in a place where there was a famine? That's our story for today. Join me next time for a new and exciting adventure. I'm Melissa George, and this is The Mindful Heart.